Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to one of MediaBeacon's ongoing webinars on features in MediaBeacon. This is our Deep Search webinar, and I would like to share with you today some of the intricate little parts of MediaBeacon so far as searching is concerned, and different ways to use search and different ways to perform searches. I have everybody's microphones muted at this time. You can certainly ask a question at any point in the chat, but I will address question and answers in the last 15 minutes of our time slot here. So I think that I will go ahead and get started with what I wanted to talk to you today about. So for those of you who signed up and saw our little blurb, we're going to be talking about making the most of MediaBeacon search technologies, as well as outline some best practices in metadata taxonomy. We're going to show an array of different search use cases and techniques to overcome some common challenges and things like that. So let's dive right into MediaBeacon. This is my training server that I use for the trainings. And a couple of things I just wanted to start out with before we begin is some terminology that I want to make sure that everybody's familiar with. When we are searching in MediaBeacon, we'll be combining a number of different criteria together, search criteria. So for example, this is referred to as a search criterion. And there can be many search criteria. And the set of assets that you see at any given time, that is referred to as the current view. And very often we will be combining several different terms together in various different ways. And we'll use an operator. Sometimes that's an and or an or. Other times, if we're doing a more in-depth search, we might be doing something like contains or is not null, something like that. So there's just some basic terminology I wanted to make sure that everybody was familiar with. So in MediaBeacon, the result of all searches, all search criteria is known as the current view. But oftentimes we'll just say search results, but that's just some common terminology. So let's start off and talk about what exactly is it that MediaBeacon can search for, and then we'll move in and talk a little bit about some of the techniques you can use and some of the tools that we have. First and foremost, MediaBeacon can search for metadata in an asset that is XMP based. And of course, this is something that longtime users of MediaBeacon are going to be very familiar with. XMP is a metadata standard by Adobe, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of what the XMP specification looks like, but basically every field of data that's XMP is going to have what we refer to as a URI. And I'll just take a look at the back end just briefly to show that. Every field has a schema, and this is what looks like a web address, but it's a unique identifier. Then we have an internal name, and that just identifies the field in what's called a namespace. It's just a specific identifier for the values that would be housed there. And we can further then abstract that field with a display name. It could be any given string of text. It doesn't have to be the same as internal name at all. But the schema and internal name always stay the same for that piece of any values that are written to an asset. And with XMP, one thing to really remember is that it's always written to an asset. It's not an arbitrary piece of information that just lives in a database somewhere. So the thing about MediaBeacon's XMP is it's always attached to a specific asset. One of the other types of, there's actually a number of these. We also can search some database information, but again, we use a very XMP-like structure, and it's always going to be a per asset sort of thing. So if I'm looking for something like a file name, of course, it's actually a database field. That, of course, relates to a specific asset. Other things that we search for are things like indexed text. So there are certain types of assets that, for example, like InDesign, PDFs, also, if properly previewed, Office documents that we can extract what we call indexed text out of. So the actual string of "get ready for Edgar Winter" here is actually something that is searchable as indexed text. If I had a PDF of Jack London's Call of the Wild, I would be able to type in the word wolf and find that PDF, because the title does not have wolf in it, but the text of that novel does. So that's a good example of indexed text. Also, there's file names, of course, which I mentioned earlier, and there is a whole host of other fields that we use internally that sometimes are referred to as database fields. Things like the record ID of an asset, which is a unique number that is assigned to every asset in the system. If there's ever a situation where there's a collision, the old asset is going to retain that number, and the new one is going to get assigned another one. So that is an example of a database field. But we do write it to metadata, but it's administrated in a slightly different way. So that's kind of the breadth of things that we can search for in MediaBeacon. There are a couple of data structures that we preferentially don't search for. There are a good example of this is something called asset links. And let's see if I can find a good example of that. Asset links, for example, just associate one file with another one. And that can be as simple as dragging and dropping an asset onto another one, or using a menu command to link a couple of them together. Like, for example, making a link like this. Oops, I'm sorry, link assets, which is perfectly fine. The only problem is that we do not actually search for that association, because that data is actually, it's in the database, and there are some database fields that we do not actually search for. So there are a limit of things that we have. If, as an admin, you have not looked at the Advanced XMP metadata tab, this is something that may be useful to you. This will show you all the metadata that's currently in an asset that MediaBeacon is aware of. And some of these things are fields that can be searched, some aren't. You would also be able to see metadata that's XMP structured metadata that you might not have a field built for. So you'll be able to see it here. Of course, if you don't have a field built for it, even though you might have the metadata inside of MediaBeacon, MediaBeacon can't search for it because it doesn't have a framework to find that information. But we do hold all that information. There are some things which are searchable. Some of this MediaBeacon metadata isn't directly searchable, for example. But in general, anything that is on a metaform is something that we'd be able to search. And I'm not going to go too much into the configuration of it, but in order to search something with either the quick search tool or the search filter, a field would have to be what we call research indexed. And in most cases, you're going to want everything to be research indexed because you want to search everything. But there are cases where you might not, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So that's a brief overview of what MediaBeacon can search for. basically it's any kind of metadata. We also can even do some searches for things like color. And I won't dive too much into that right now, but we make a little histogram of colors with each preview, and you can search for those as well. But we're going to be primarily focused on looking at some of the basic search tools we've got here. I'm not going to say there's a debate, but there's kind of two schools of thought with regards to what the most important search tool in MediaBeacon is. Quick search is certainly the one that in our default interface is the top and at the up at the left, which for most people is what they're going to see first. And this is a pretty obvious sort of thing. You're just going to enter a word, and if you have metadata that's tagged correctly, or assets that are tagged correctly with metadata, you're going to get back things that are going to be relevant to you. Quick search is an extremely broad search. This is going to search all those categories of metadata that I talked about. It's going to look in all XMP metadata. It's going to look in all index text, general information. It's also going to look in the file name as well. So, for example, this one has the word frog in it, so I'm getting that one back because of at least the file name. This one does not. And a tool that I think everybody should be familiar with MediaBeacon is what's called pinpoint text. And this is going to give you some basic information like the file name and whether there's a text excerpt. In this case, there isn't because it's just a JPEG. And if there are metadata values, it's going to highlight those. So it's not exactly like a Google search, but we can highlight the terms that we find for things like just finding a value inside of metadata. And this is just a standard function of MediaBeacon. When you add a view component to your interface, it's not on by default, but that's something that is easily turned on with configuration so that everybody can use that. So if you ever wonder why an asset comes back, this is a really big tool that we use. I use this all the time to check that I'm getting back the results I think I should. So, that's some of the basic things that we would do with quick search. But diving a little deeper into how you use it, what exactly and how exactly does quick search operate? It's going to be a little bit different than Google is, because in most cases, what we're searching for is what's called a whole word. So when I'm searching for amphibian, for example, I am looking for that string of text, and I'm not looking for part of the word. So I type in amphi, and I don't find anything. The reason for this is that I don't have a feature that we can turn on, which we'll talk about later, called substring searching. Sometimes you're going to want this, sometimes you won't, but quick search, unless a field is configured in a particular way with that substring, is going to look for what are referred to as whole words. So if I look for example, what's a good example here? Fur seal. It's going to give me a result that seems pretty rational. I get fur seal. But what's happening in the background is that it's searching for anything that contains fur or seal. Basically, when you type a string in, it's going to look for whole words to search for and automatically do an and together with those. And that's something that is worth thinking about. And when you type in a phrase, there are going to be things that MediaBeacon will search for and things that it's going to ignore, for example. Now, I have a phrase here that I'm going to copy and paste in. So if I was looking for an exact phrase here that can strike with great power, I'm going to enter that, and I'm going to get back a picture of a mantis shrimp, which of course are our tough little things. And of course we can see that I've got that can strike with great power here. But there's a couple things going on that are definitely worth noting. If I look at pinpoint text, we're going to see that in the description, I only see can strike great power. And the reason for this is that MediaBeacon does not search for certain strings that are referred to as stop words. And I do have a list of this. I should have probably put it in a slide. But it's some basic basic operators that you might get with kind of Boolean search things. So a good example of those is things like and are, etc. So things like not and are ignored. So that is one difference about MediaBeacon than maybe some other types of plain text entry that you might be familiar with. We don't use operators, banana and stand. That's not going to do anything special. We already and banana and stand together. Not, for example, would be entirely ignored because it's not. It's on that stop list. So if I type in, and it used to be a long time ago that MediaBeacon would have slightly different behavior for 1, 2, and 3-letter words. We actually will search for those now perfectly easily. So I can find A, so I can look for files that contain A, and that's going to be a big search result. But if I enter an, it won't even enter that term because that's one of the terms on our stop list of terms. So when you're searching for like long strings of text, those like 20 or so stop words are going to be ignored. So and that is going to happen even if I were to even if I were to put my previous quote that can strike with great power. Even if I use quotes, that's going to be the case. So just be aware of that. Also, characters like underscores are ignored with the plain text search inside of quick search. So a lot of this is done for speed optimization and things like that. But those are some of the individual differences that you might see with MediaBeacon's quick search than other plain text searches you may be aware of. So just some more specific details that I wanted to be really clear about that MediaBeacon will do. There are some other things that quick search can do that I'll talk about when we talk about some other contexts of searching. But now I'd like to move on to talk about advanced search. Of course, this can search on a specific field with a specific operator and for a specific value. Very powerful kind of search. If you've got a date field, we get a huge array of different operators you can use. And a lot of them are going to be based on today as a concept. So very useful if you want to have a relative date. If I want to find everything that has a date value in this field that was within 30 days or 30 days after or before, we have a lot of those options, so really useful. So not everybody's necessarily aware of those all those different I always say combinators, I mean to say operators. Integers also have some different things. They can do numeric comparisons and things like that. So those are the things you can use with searching. Another really powerful thing that advanced search can do is can look for is null and is not null. So basically just those two things. That, for a long time, was kind of one of the special things that advanced search could do that other kinds of search that we had couldn't do. But that has changed quite a bit over the last few years. Obviously, the next tool we're going to talk about is a search filter, and this is something that I really think is one of the main drivers of search and that everybody should have access to. The challenge, I think, for administrators is trying to figure out for each group of users what are the fields they most need, and how do they begin a search? What is the most relevant things to them? But beyond that configuration, there's a host of interesting things that this component can do. Obviously, when I click a search and I choose mammal, I know that it is the word mammal only in keywords. So I have 52 results here. And if I type in mammal here, I have 53 because I have, for example, mammal in a file name for another file that's not in that particular field. So I can very specifically filter down to exactly what metadata is where. Another really interesting thing you can do is if you hold down the Shift key and click a term, it will be added to the search criteria as a not term. So I want to find anything that contains mammal or file name contains mammal, but is not keyword mammal. So I can very easily pick apart those results and find exactly where that metadata actually lives. Now, oftentimes, something like keywords, and I'm just using Dublin Core keywords here, you may have multiple terms in a field, like a comma-separated field like keywords is. In this case, I can choose whether I want to have this term be anded or ored. I should clear the other criteria. So right here, I'm looking for any assets that are mammal, and it's only going to show me 4 here. So there's only 4 other combinations of keywords that exist. If I go to OR, then I can choose a whole bunch of different ones. So I can choose any combination of these. So I'm looking for something that contains, for example, mammal or the keyword 1, for example, which this one does. So very handy things that you can do. One thing that might seem like a limitation at first is if I'm selecting terms on different fields, I can't choose an OR between them. That's something that we would want to use quick search for. I'm sorry, we didn't want to use advanced search for. And this really gets into how we can build more advanced searches. And this is something that's been part of the product for a long time, but it may not be immediately obvious to everybody how it works. So if I want a complex search, I want to look for mammal or reptile, and keywords contains terrestrial or arboreal, for example. So I'm looking for a kind of specific result set here. I've got 2 OR criteria that are then ANDed together. And that's not something I can build with a search filter by itself, and it's not something I can build in a single advanced search. I can have one criteria between a set of fields. But what I can do is I can use the Search Within Results button. And this is how I can build more complex searches. So what I would do initially is just set up with the particular terms that I want. So I can have, and say something like, I'll just use keywords here. Egg and pups, not a common situation for metadata, but that might be what we would want. And I would just perform a search. to get the other criteria that I'm looking for, I can go to Advanced Search, and I'll do keywords contains that, and then I'll do search within results. And in this case, I really wanted or, so I can change the criteria between and or just by clicking on the term. So I can build a much more complex term. And I'm not going to find anything because nothing is platypus and echidna at the same time, for example. So, but that's how you can use the advanced search functionality to build more complex searches by using search within results. You can keep adding terms that can be anded or or'd with each other while maintaining an internal and or. I should also mention that these more complex search terms, the display of these search terms is an option of the search status component. You can turn on whether you see the ors, the ands, and these parentheticals that define the logic of the search. Where we start getting into really complex things is if I wanted to build a search that was X or Y, but not X and Z. We don't have an and not operator. In that case, if we wanted to, have something that was something as a mammal or a reptile, and but we didn't want any mammalian predators, what we would do is we want to do an and that would contain mammal, but we want to say not predator. So instead of having a conjunction that says like but not or without, we would have to take that negative term and push it into one of the contained terms inside that added search chunk there. So that's been a question that's come up a couple of times, is exactly how do you do a more complex search like that? And we just have to think of all the, we pretty much have and or for the two conjoining terms. So that's a point that I wanted to point out. Some things that may not be immediately obvious about that. So beyond using our advanced search to do more complex searches, there's lots of things, of course, that once I've built a search, I want to use that search for, and that gets into our saved searches. And I can save a search by adding terms here and then just going to save, and I'll be able to save that search. But anytime that I show results in the search status area, again, optionally, I can turn on the save button. That's going to save this search in a way with all those criteria that can then be saved and used later. So we've got a number of searches that I've used that I'm going to be showing you today in ways that are connected with the configuration of MediaBeacon. We used to, in the old days, have to write out things like SQL terms or build searches in little interfaces to configure different kinds of filtration for assets inside the system. We don't really use that anymore. We build a saved search and then we would use it in configuration. And MediaBeacon is now even aware that a particular search is used in configuration. It will tell you that in this interface. So another really handy feature. Likewise, another amazing thing that I think it's amazing because it's brand new to me, is that we can now edit a search. So if I made a mistake and I had a misspelling in this search, I don't have to remake a search and reconnect it to whatever configuration that I had used it in. I can just edit it. So that is I think that's a huge advantage over how it used to be. So, so we certainly have figured out ways that we can search for specific terms and conjoin them in different ways. But there are a couple of use cases that are a little bit outside of that kind of proposition. One of which that comes up from time to time is the ability to search for multiple terms at once. Now, certainly I could set up a saved search, or I could use an advanced search to like build, 12 different terms and write them all out, but that's pretty tedious. So we have a couple of other things that we can use. There it is. One of these is part of our import export functionality with our list views, and it's called bulk select. And it's just been updated in a really useful way that we haven't had before. Bulk select allows you to upload a file or copy and paste just a list of terms and then search for it. So you can search for many different words at the same time rather than having to do tedious setup. The real big thing that we just added is the ability to just single out a specific field that I'm going to be searching for. So let's say, for example, I have a bunch of file names that I know need to be reviewed or something changed about them. And I just have the file names. So if I want to find them all in one step without having to do any other tedious searching, I can use the copy and paste, and I'll just put my list of terms or assets in there. And I'm going to look, instead of the record ID, I'm going to look for the file name. As you can see, that is a database. And I can also choose a condition. It can be an exact match, contains or is contained by the actual file name. In this case, I know they're exact, but if I, for example, didn't have the file extensions, I could also do a search where we'd be able to use those. So when I fire this off, without my current view without filtering has 442 results, and when I do that search, I'm going to get back 25. And you can see pretty easily that, not that you counted the lines that I pasted in, but there were 12 of them, I have over double that. And that's because I do have some duplicates in my system. And that's another thing I want to talk about, is how do I find duplicates in the system, and how do I figure out what's truly a duplicate or not, or if just it's a file name that matches, but otherwise the files might somehow be different. So whenever you have a result set like this, some of the other tools that you might use for searching are the filter headers. And these things are sometimes overlooked for how powerful they are. These are, in every respect, as powerful as the search filter. They allow you to do filtration and also sorting. So I can sort these things and actually get things in a nice sorted list. That's usually what people use it for, but there's also other options for doing searches. If I don't have a current search going on, one of the things that this will show me is a list of terms, and it's basically the same as a search filter term. So I can tell that there are, for example, 3 files named a particular thing. And same thing with keywords. I can get a list of what those terms are. So as a search tool, don't forget about the filter headers here. They also can help you out quite a bit. And we're also able to do empty value, which I think is actually new. I don't think we were actually able to do that before. But just by giving somebody a list of headers at the top, and this can be done to any of our view components, you're going to get the same functionality. So really useful way to sort without having it be in a separate component, and also do some filtration. Also worth noting, before I move on, if you do show more, it's going to give you a filter box that allows you to find something specific. So if I type in, let's actually look for, I don't have anything, but I can actually filter for specific for specific name, in this case, file names, but this would work the same with other fields as well. And that's a very, very similar function when it comes to the search filter as well. I'm also able to use the same functionality. When I expand that list, I'm able to filter by a string. So I can filter the term so I can see on that field just what's there. So, but I know that I'm not going to find hello everywhere. It's just going to be in that field. So really nice targeted ways to do searches. Oh, there is one other thing that Quick Search can do that is kind of an interesting function. And it only works with Quick Search, or rather, this particular function does something special in Quick Search. If you happen to have a bunch of MediaBeacon record IDs, MediaBeacon is going to be especially aware of that. So I'm going to drop in a list here of, what is that? Looks like 12 different record IDs. And these are, it's just those terms separated with a comma and a space. And when I hit return, and I appreciate this doesn't display fantastically well, but MediaBeacon is first going to see if there's any file name that contains that string or a file contains that string, but it also realizes, hey, these are record IDs. So it's going to look for the record IDs. Now, of course, these, you're not going to find that string inside of a file name or inside of a file. So even if I take those criteria away, still it is showing me 12 results because it's bringing back those exact assets. And that's a nice thing. If you use the record ID, you can find assets. And en masse, using the record ID and the quick search without having to use bulk select or anything like that. But it's kind of just for record IDs. So another useful little trick that you may or may not have seen before. But we did just briefly touch on the fact that it was pretty easily revealed that I have a bunch of duplicates in my system, quite a lot, in fact. So how is it exactly that, what are some of the ways you can mitigate that? Well, we have a new function in MediaBeacon 2019.2, which allows us to make comparisons in a visual way that we weren't really able to do before. So what I've done here is I've built a search filter that has this new thing called view hash code and other criteria that, depending upon your situation, may or may not be indicators of actual duplication in files. Let's actually try one of these out. So I'm going to click on this one here. And this hash code is just an arbitrary number that's generated by MediaBeacon looking at the preview of an asset. It does that for every asset in the system. And it knows that the hash value of this image is equal to that. So it doesn't name it anything logical. It doesn't know that it's a tortoise specifically. But that hash code indicates that there are three very identical looking files to MediaBeacon. So visually they're going to be almost identical, if not identical. And when I use view hash code inside my search filter, this is going to also filter all the other results there. So I can tell that all these files, all these assets are named the same thing, giant tortoise. But that doesn't tell me the whole story. I also use another one of our database fields called long name, and this is going to tell me the path inside of MediaBeacon. So I know that these assets are in different directories. So for whatever reason, I've got assets in different directories that appear identical. But another thing that I'll bring to bear here is file size. Now you'll notice that these don't match, or rather there's two entries for 4.36, and that's because what's displayed there is a rounding. Basically, MediaBeacon is comparing the number of bytes, and it's finding that all three of them are slightly different. So what this indicates is probably that I uploaded an asset, added some metadata, downloaded it, and uploaded it again, and did the same thing again. So each time there are a very small number of bytes more information because of probably metadata. So it may indicate that these are not totally identical files. So depending on what you consider to be identical, there may be very different fields that you would want to bring to bear here. So these are some techniques that we've been looking at to help build more of a way of finding duplicates and things like that. Also, there's another feature that if you upload a file that shares a hash code with a previously existing asset, it'll pop up a little indicator in the corner that says that you've got duplicate detected, and it'll allow you to click a link and see those assets. And you may have seen that feature on another demo. I just wanted to actually show you what's really going on under the hood. It's actually this hash code that's running all of that. So it's a very small piece of metadata, but I think it's pretty powerful. All right, we're coming up on the end here, but I wanted to go over a couple of things that like hard things to search for, really hard things that in the past have sometimes been difficult for people to look for. Now, while we don't search asset links, there's a bunch of other things that we are able to do. So I've made a bunch of save searches that I added to a places tree. So let's say I want to find things like assets that are checked out. Our checkout function has changed from version to version, and I was able to find that if there is any value in checkout status or checkout user, that means that it is checked out currently. And I can also combine that or just use checkout user is me. And the way I'm doing this search is something that is really, really cool. And it's called Search Substitutions. If another user were to log in and use this same search, they would find any assets that they checked out. It would substitute their name. And what we're doing in the background here, so I've got checkout user contains, and this is a search substitution term, contains $username. So it's going to, instead of a discrete piece of metadata, or a discrete value, it's going to look for, in my user account, the username, and then it's going to use that. And there's a number, all of the fields inside the user account, most of them, I believe, can be used. So, for example, if I wanted to do the country that I have listed there, I can go user, and you'll see a number of these here that pop up. LDAP, and it's just an old term that exists in MediaBeacon. It means information that might come from an IDP called country. So whatever I have in country, it would then do the search for. So when I perform this search, it says USA because my user has USA in that field. So you can be quite relative based on the user as a user account as a source of your search term. So I didn't, obviously there's no checkout user contains a country, but that's what you can use the search criteria for. Another thing that I wanted to make sure that we could do is a lot of the new things that we're doing in MediaBeacon rely heavily on the versioning technology that we've got. And in particular, the Adobe connector uses that quite a bit. So I want to find assets that have been versioned. So I was able to use some of the deeper fields inside of MediaBeacon that we're looking for something called version number. As long as it's not null, it's going to be a version. It's going to be an asset that represents a whole stack of assets that are different versions, for example. So this one, for example, does have multiple versions of that particular asset. So that was something that was sometimes difficult for people to find and grasp, and I just want to let people know that, yes, that is absolutely true, and of course we can do the inverse and find things that don't have any versions at all. I can also look for things that I have uploaded, for example, because MediaBeacon always adds a piece of information called upload user. And again, I'm using a search substitution so I can find anything that's uploaded by me. Another interesting thing that we can do with Save Searches is I can find things that are in multiple specific folders. It's not necessarily something that comes up a lot, but if I know that I'm always going to be looking in these two folders, I can build a search that just looks in those two if I am not looking for any other metadata, which I would normally be doing. So some interesting special searches that that we're able to bring to bear. Before I open this up for some more, open up for questions and answers, I want to just go through some of the other things that MediaBeacon can do with Save Searches. Now, one of the really powerful things that we can do is we can make a Save Search and we can apply it to either the ACL level or we can apply it to a view component. So I have 3 infinite scrolls here, and there we go, for example. In this particular infinite scroll, it's always going to load a search that is going to automatically move my search to the biological taxonomy folder. So if I can, even if I don't have the directory browser over here, I can still have a way to see a particular set of assets just by using a Save Search inside the configuration, and a really nifty way to do that. The other thing that we've improved with recent versions of MediaBeacon is our ability to use these Save Searches to do conditional download and what we call ACL Search Filters. So this allows me to do kind of 2 things at once. So I'll jump into this other ACL, and what this is doing, only assets that are tagged with West Group as their owner are going to be shown to me. So this is not a new trick in MediaBeacon by any means, but one of the things that people may not realize is that we can also do this with our ability to restrict someone's ability to download things. So you'll notice that I can download this asset and that one, but I can't download this one. It just doesn't give me the option. And that's because I have completely restricted that. And that's being done by a piece of metadata called conditional download. And I just have no rights to that. So because it's no rights, I can't download it. Now, obviously, you wouldn't give your users the ability to edit these fields, but if I were to switch this to unlimited rights, for example, it's going to change that that file to be downloadable. So, and that again is all run by our saved searches. So, really useful function for determining who gets to see and/or download specific assets. I think the last thing that I will talk about before we have any Q&A from our audience is going to be just some general guidelines that I have for setting up searchable taxonomies. All these search tools are very well and good, but understanding how you build your taxonomy is really important to this as well. My overall theory is doing this initially, or even revising it, is try to define the result sets first. What kinds of assets do you want to find as a group? And are there granularities inside those things? And it's not really just about a keyword. It's like, what is this set or sets of overlapping categories? Is it holiday promotions, or is it campaigns, or is it things produced for another business group? What are those result sets that you need to find? And then based on those, you can more easily build a taxonomy rather than just relying on keywords added without the same level of structure used in building them. Sometimes it's really useful to understand the inclusivity and exclusivity of searches or of terminology. Do I want to exclude assets from certain groups? If I do, do I add a term that I don't look for, or do I add a term that I'm going to do a not search for? And there may be different reasons to do each of those. And based on like those kinds of questions, that can help figure out what kind of taxonomy you should have. A lot of the considerations that I've dealt with over the years, things like, do you need single value fields or do you need multi-value fields? A good example of this is if I have a piece of metadata that defines who owns an asset in terms of a business group within an organization, is that something that is a sole ownership, or is there multiple ownership? Or if I'm sharing it, can I share it with multiple groups at once? So do I need this to be multi-value or not? Sometimes we want hierarchical metadata. We didn't have enough time to talk about that. It's probably something you guys have seen before. But sometimes you will want hierarchical metadata. So other times you want that metadata to be just flat terms that don't specifically relate to each other. But one of the things that's really important about hierarchical metadata is that if I have the word mammalia in that hierarchy, it's always related to everything chordata and animalia, for example. So it's not a term just flying around by itself. So a couple of other things that I'll let you just take a look at the slide deck here. We are kind of running out of time here. But if there are any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask now, we can either do that in text, or you can unmute yourself in the WebEx and ask. I'll take a look at those. So question here, this conditional download functionality, can you pair a badge in the view widget tied to this field to indicate to a user that they could download a particular asset? Yeah, I could add a badge that would do either show them that they can download it or can't. So either way, based upon that metadata, I can just simply assign a badge criteria. So yes, absolutely, that's definitely something that you could do. The download functionality, anything that is the results of the search that's used in the conditional download field in the ACL setup are the things that you are able to download. And you'd use the opposite search in your case, I believe. So very good question. Another question here, is the advanced XMP metaform available to group administrators? That's kind of an interesting question. I don't often people seeing the group administrator using that particular level. That's actually something that I don't know right off the top of my head. That's a really interesting thing. Usually it's restricted to just global admins. I think you might be able to, but I think I'd have to check on that one. That's a very good question. I don't 100% know. So, okay, another question here. Would the hash search pick up images that are resized greatly? We have a PSD of an asset, another size down for social media. Ostensibly, it would. I haven't tested the any massive changing. If you were to like put a border around it, that would definitely change the character. The hash is based upon the preview of the asset, not the original. It's not hashing the original bitmap of the image. It's just hashing the preview that we make. So and of course, if sometimes previews will have different pixels based upon whether it's crunched down a huge amount, it may not match. But right now, the hash it searches for an exact match for itself. But that said, it's a fairly small number. It's not fantastically precise down to every single pixel. But I think in that case, it would probably detect both of those. Another question here, duplicate section. Does this eliminate versions from the duplicate list only to look at asset IDs? Let's see, I not quite understand the question. Parsing through that, the duplicate detection that we have, we don't automatically remove anything. We're somewhat loath to build a function that would delete things automatically out of the system. We want a human to make those kinds of choices. But obviously, every asset that's in the system is going to have a different asset ID. I'm not sure I'm quite capturing the what you're getting at with your question. So I don't know if there's any clarifications that you need to make there. If a PSD has been versioned, will it eliminate this from the search? That's correct. Every time that you have a version in MediaBeacon, for example, we've got versioned assets. Everything that's in what we call the version stack that's not on the top, for example, these are assets that exist in the system, and I can actually go in and still see them. But those are normally excluded from searches because they're considered to be sort of renditions or sort of in the image stack, and they're not the canonical version of that asset. So that is correct. The duplicates is not going to find those things, and that's by design. Very good question. If anybody has anything else that they would like to ask about what we've talked about here today, and anything that maybe we didn't fully get to, or any other questions you have about MediaBeacon searching in general, please let us know. We'll be sending out a survey to let everybody let us know how we did. Things that, and it's also a great place to request other webinars in the future. A lot of the webinars we've been doing this year are very much based upon your what people want to see out of a webinar in MediaBeacon. I'll be posting this recording hopefully later today, so other people will be able to see it. So unless anybody else has any other questions, I think that's kind of our time for today. So thank you very, very much, everybody, for joining. I appreciate your time, and I was happy to share with you an overview of some, high-level and deep-level searching that MediaBeacon can do. Of course, I'm sure that everyone here could come up with some really great examples of things that they would like to be able to find better, or ways that they'd like to search. So also, we would love to hear your voice in any of those particulars. So. What other webinars are planned? Good questions. Actually, I'd kind of run through some of the major ones that I wanted to do this year. So these will be announced by the marketing team, and we will let you guys know those as soon as we have some stuff for you to take a look at and plan for. So I think initially, just to digress for a moment, one of my major purposes here is to find out what people want to learn about. I can think about what I want to tell people all day, but what you want to know is much more valuable. So please let us know in that survey and or an email to myself or anyone on the marketing team, Maria included. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today, and I'll let you go. Again, thanks very much, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. Happy Friday.